Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, as we've been reporting, this conference looks and feels very different to Labour conferences in years gone by. And it's not just around the fringes that you see the change. Yesterday on the conference floor, we saw loud cheers for pledges to renationalise industry, plenty of old-fashioned Tory bashing, and a standing ovation for one of the heroes of the left. Take a look at this.
I want people to have no doubt. Rail, water, energy, Royal Mail, we're taking them back.
I know that Boris doesn't like paternity tests, but maybe we need one for Brexit. Maybe we should take him into a studio with Jeremy Kyle. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. We got the results back, and it looks like this one's one of yours.
That's what we did in 1945. We built a National Health Service and we introduced industrial injury benefit for all those workers. We brought in free education from the cradle to the grave. That's why we're going to get rid of tuition fees. Vote Labour. I can't wait for it. All power to your elbow. Thank you very much.
Rousing speech there from Dennis Skinner. Well, we're joined now by the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Debbie Abrahams. Welcome to the Daily Politics here at Brighton. Let's take a look at some of the speeches and some of the sort of themes that have come out of it. Cautious of technological advancements, buying PFI contracts, nationalising major sectors. Can you understand why this might be terrifying for business, who are already having to deal with Brexit?
We had a very successful business reception last night, but also we have had a round table with dozens of businesses, and I think they feel very assured about the approach that we're taking around Brexit, and we look to build on that.
And PFI?
PFI, what we have said is there are going to be no new PFI contracts, but in terms of what we do with the existing ones, we're going to have a review and look to bring in as many as appropriate for value for the customer, for the taxpayer.
And was business reassured when you spoke to them about that?
Yeah, so we had, as I say, it was a very, very positive meeting last night.
Except the CBI chief has said, Carolyn Fairbairn, that actually it'll send investors running to the hills.
Well, that we'll wait and see, but we haven't committed to exactly how many we'll bring forward. We know that we'll have the review first, and then we'll look to put, as I say, as many as is appropriate and that is value to the taxpayer.
John McDonnell said very clearly yesterday that he would bring those contracts in-house. Now, are you saying there will be a review first?
Yeah, that was very clear, to be fair. And if you look at the briefing associated with that, it was very clear, no new PFI contracts, but there would be a review to see what will be value to the taxpayer in terms of bringing them in-house.
Right. He did actually say we're going to bring them back in-house. There wasn't actually specifics in the speech about a review. It was talked about afterwards. Have estimates been done around how much it would cost if you took in hundreds of PFI contracts?
No, we haven't looked at that because obviously it would depend on the review, and what we will ensure that those that are brought back in would have government bonds in replacement.
Right, so it wasn't just a sort of crowd pleaser, if you like. You do still need to do the detailed financing on how much compensation you would need to pay to actually get out of some of these contracts, which will have been legally drawn up.
We do, we recognise that, and so we were very careful in terms of how we couched this, Joe. We said it would be a review first.
Right. I think people will be disappointed here in the hall if in the end you come out and say those contracts are not going to be brought in-house. I mean, Dave Prentice, who is the General Secretary of Unison, said we will be doing it and it will be good value for money. You don't sound so sure.
Again, to be boring and to repeat what I've said, no new contracts, reviewing the existing ones to make sure that those that are brought back in are going to be value to the taxpayer.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, your colleague, said that under the Conservatives, automation would mean monopoly profits for the few and increased exploitation for the many. Is there anything Labour can do without effectively intervening directly in business practices and stalling the rate of automation?
I think it's really important that we should embrace automation, that ultimately it will have a positive effect. What we've got to make sure is that we have an appropriate transition. So we will be seeing additional, as we are currently seeing supermarkets and so on, more and more automation in the tills and access that way. But what we need to make sure is that we have adequate social security support, which I'm sure you're going to be asking me about now, Joe, in terms of what I said in my speech yesterday about the fact that the government's universal credit programme is just not fit for purpose. It isn't providing that support for people who are in work but are low paid.
Right, well, let's talk about that and pick up on that point. Do you think it doesn't work for anybody, universal credit?
I think the vast majority of people are struggling. We know that 1 in 4, not the majority, but 1 in 4 will have to wait more than 6 weeks. So it's meant to be a 4-week programme, but 1 in 4 are waiting for 6 weeks for their first payment, Joe. 1 in 10 over 10 weeks. This is putting people into real difficulty, putting them into rent arrears. I had a nurse coming to me, a single mum. She moved from tax credits to universal credit. She waited 6 weeks. She went into rent arrears, and now she's been served an eviction notice. This is not acceptable.
And there are dreadful stories, which you have already explained on this programme many times since you took up your position.
I don't think I have, to be honest, Joe.
You have given examples to me of people. All right, well,
to be fair, I haven't. I think it hasn't been picked up as it should have been.
All right, well, you've explained it there. You have talked about it before with me, that there are people struggling. What I was going to ask you is...
I've talked about disabled people, which I'm happy to also move on to. The fact that the UN committee again issued real concerns about how the government is treating sick and disabled people, that it is a human catastrophe. This is, the UK in 2017, in terms of what they are doing to sick and disabled people, it is shocking. And I think that's the last time I was on this programme to talk about the issues there. So we've got people in low-paid work really struggling, 7.4 million working people living in poverty under this government, and a dysfunctional social security system. On top of that, you also have the automation that you asked me about before.
Right, which you don't want to stall, as you say, or hold back automation. So I say to you again, it's not really working for enough people, universal credit, and in your mind, what should be done with it?
We should be calling a pause. It's due to be rolled,
but not dismantled.
It needs to be fixed. We set out in our manifesto. We set out in our manifesto that we wanted to transform universal credit because it wasn't.
Because you think it is working in some instances.
I want to keep the principles which we signed up to right at the beginning, Joe, if you remember, which is about a simplified social security system, one which makes work pay. None of this exists under this government, under this social security programme.
All right, just finally, on the WASPy Women campaign, tell us what your proposal for them is.
Our proposal there is, as a starter, on top of what we have pledged around pension credit, that a woman at 64 could bring forward her pension, her state pension.
Is it enough? Because there are those who say actually it doesn't go far enough to compensate those women.
It's a starter, and I made that really clear in my speech and in the briefing afterwards.
Debbie Abrahams, thank you for joining me.
Tomorrow at noon, Labour's leader will stand at the podium for the final speech of conference. He'll tell his audience, and he hopes a much wider crowd, that Labour is ready for government. If it sounds like the bold electioneering of a slogan, but as John McDonnell wargames possible economic scenarios such as a run on the pound once his party takes power, this programme has learned of other preparations being made to ready Labour for a snap election and for government. Our political editor, Watt, is here. Nick, let's start with this speech. You've gleaned a little bit of what's going to be said by Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow.
Yes, well, opposition leaders need to be very careful when they say they're about to go in government. Those of us of an older generation can remember the guffaws that greeted the former Liberal leader when he famously said, and I tell this conference, go back to your constituencies and prepare for government. But there will not be laughter in this hall tomorrow, and indeed there will be a serious tone in Downing Street when Jeremy Corbyn says that the Labour Party under his leadership has become a government in waiting, and Labour, he will say, is ready to take power, and he will have a real pop at the Conservatives over Brexit. He will say, never has the national interest been so ill-served on such a vital issue, and he will say, if there was no other reason for the Tories to go, their self-interested Brexit bungling would be reason enough.
You've also learnt something about preparations for government within Downing Street, should it get that far?
Yes, well, this party has agreed that Jeremy Corbyn is here to stay, and secondly, a general election could come much sooner than expected. Jeremy Corbyn told a meeting of Labour's National Executive last week there could be a snap election because Theresa May could lose control of her party. And so the party machinery is facing what is described as a standing instruction to be ready for an immediate election. They are bringing forward the selection of Labour candidates, 76 Labour candidates in England, 20 Labour candidates in Scotland and 10 Labour candidates in Wales. The process for the manifesto is a bit more laborious, but as they showed earlier this year, they can pull one out of the hat pretty quickly if they need to. So look, I've been looking today at all these issues, so here's my report.
Looking forward to my Prime Minister being Jeremy Corbyn.
You see him here, you see him there, you see him everywhere. Perish the thought that Labour is embracing a personality cult, but Jeremy Corbyn is turning into something of an icon. Even his cat, El Gato, is depicted on merchandise. £15. And this isn't about making a few bucks for party coffers. All sides genuinely believe Jeremy Corbyn could soon be walking through this famous door. Behind me is Labour's conference hotel here in Brighton. I'm told that in here last Friday, Jeremy Corbyn told a meeting of Labour's ruling National Executive Committee that they could soon be facing a snap general election campaign. He told his party that Tory divisions over Brexit means that Theresa May could lose control of her party and stumble into a general election.
And of course, as a party, we are on an election footing. We're going to be out there selecting our candidates in those key seats we need to win. And on this Saturday, we're going to have one of our biggest national campaign days, taking that message of hope and of a better, fairer, more equal Britain to the country ahead of the Tory party conference in Manchester.
An early election would throw open some of the central questions about Jeremy Corbyn and his future. Does he really believe he can be Prime Minister, or does he believe his central mission is to secure the leadership of the Labour Party for a future generation of left-wingers? I've spoken to one long-standing ally of Jeremy Corbyn who says he is in no doubt that he will be Prime Minister within the next few years. At that point, he will have achieved two historic goals. He will have put Labour back into power and he will have secured number 10 for the left. Once in number 10, the 68-year-old would do something rare for a new incumbent: implement a succession plan that's been underway for some time. The Labour left, who are mostly in their 60s, believe they've been weakened by what they call the missing generation. For more than a decade, their supporters struggled to be selected as Labour parliamentary candidates. They joke that their group was known as the Sealed Tomb. Over the last few elections, a broader range of candidates have been selected, and the leadership has now identified two possible successors: Rebecca Long-Bailey and Angela Rayner. So a rapturous reception there for Angela Rayner as she told of her story of how the Labour movement allowed her to make the journey from being a single mum without qualifications to sitting in the shadow cabinet. She's been supported by her shadow cabinet colleague Rebecca Long-Bailey. These two members of the shadow cabinet lie at the heart of Jeremy Corbyn's thinking. If he finds himself Prime Minister anytime soon, they will be senior members of his cabinet. But also, in the longer term, the Labour leadership believes that Angela Rayner and Rebecca Long-Bailey are the sort of people who can carry the flame when Jeremy Corbyn decides to pass on to the next generation. Rebecca Long-Bailey is ready for a general election.
What we're doing now is building on what was in the manifesto, and I have to say there was a lot of work done that wasn't actually included in the manifesto, especially in terms of industrial strategy and business. We had a document the size of War and Peace that we wanted to have placed in the manifesto, but we were told that we needed a snappy few paragraphs of about 500 words. That's what will help us win the next general election, not just complaining about how bad the Tories are, but actually showing what Britain would look like under a new Labour government.
One Whitehall watcher wonders whether Labour would be ready for government after another snap election.
Well, I think it could actually be very challenging for Labour if there is a snap election and they go into government quite suddenly, and for a number of reasons. First of all, I think there are big questions about whether they would have time to talk through their policy priorities with the civil service, known as access talks, to the extent they need to before they go into government. Also, you've got the shadow front bench, who perhaps compared to previous shadow front benches are a little less experienced than normal.
A gentle, some would say unstoppable momentum is powering the rise of Jeremy Corbyn. Soon, however, he may be confronted with the realities of power.
Nick Watt.